Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bells Must Ring podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Rice, with my usually co-host, Arnav Sarkar. We have a little bit of treat for you guys today, as game day is slowly approaching us, Thursday, August 28th. We figured it'd be appropriate to uh, invite on some Mac people to help us preview our first two games of the season. This is Steve Helwick. He works with I believe it's called Hustlebelt, which is covers like I guess it's like a pun on like Rust Belt and stuff like that. It covers everything having to do with Mac athletics. If you don't mind, like tell us a little bit what you cover, like what are your specialties with each of the Mac teams and stuff like that.
Yeah, this is going to be my 10th season covering college football for Hustlebelt. So it's been a great run there. Been all around the country covering games that involve MAC teams, whether it's bowl games. I've covered UCLA Bowling Green. I've covered Texas A&M Kent State. I've covered Miami versus Miami, Miami, Florida versus
Oh
Miami,
yeah,
Ohio.
I
So
remember that one.
been all around the country covering MAC games the last decade and really enjoy it, getting to know all the teams in this conference pretty well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I myself am heading into my second season covering Rutgers athletics. This is actually Arnav's first season covering Rutgers football. So I was going to say it's a little bit of compare and contrast. We got the seasoned veteran with the two new guys over here. But I guess traveling all over, covering the MAC teams really lets you see, really lets you appreciate the world of college athletics even more.
Yeah, it's been a great run, and I'm really excited for this season. A lot of good games up on the schedule, and really I can't wait for all of them.
Yeah. And speaking for a couple of those good games, Rutgers is set to kick off against Ohio less than a week or 6 days now on the 28th, I believe 6 o'clock. Um, most Rutgers fans, or at least most casual Rutgers fans, might be looking at this game as a little bit of as a chance to beat up on an easier opponent because Rutgers does have a tendency to schedule those weaker out of conference opponents to start the year. However, Ohio has set themselves apart as being no slouch. They won the MAC championship last year, defeated Miami of Ohio, who we get to play in the second week of the season. They defeated Jacksonville State and took home the Cure Bowl trophy. And actually, Rutgers has lost to Ohio before. The first ever matchup that came way back in 1937, the Ohio Bobcats beat the Scarlet Knights in Piscataway 13-0. After that, the Rutgers won the last two games. But is there anything? Is there anything you wanted to quickly mention about? I guess what Rutgers fans should expect out of an Ohio team coming into Piscataway.
I think the most important thing to know is that last year Ohio lost around 95% of its production and was really written off before the season. I mean, they had 10-win seasons in 2022 and 2023, winning their bowl games both of those years. But 2024 wasn't supposed to be the year that Ohio was finally going to break its 56-year drought of winning the MAC. But everything came together last year, and the Bobcats members of the team told me it clicked in the Syracuse game. They realized that Syracuse team which finished ranked, had 10 wins last year, that was going to be a really good Syracuse team, and they realized their potential in that game. And then we saw it throughout the season. We saw them dominate MAC play and then just have one of the most dominant MAC championship wins, beating Miami, Ohio 38-3. So they lost a lot of production last year. So this isn't exactly new for them, having to replace so many components of the roster. They actually have better continuity this year than they did last year. The only thing that changes is head coach Tim Albin. He left for Charlotte after 20 years in Ohio, spending the 2021 through 2024 seasons as the program's head coach. So in comes Brian Smith, and just like Tim Albin was, Brian Smith is an internal hire. So Ohio likes to keep the continuity within the program, keep the stability within the program. And the Bobcats have only had one season of missing a bowl game since like 2008 or 2009. So they're consistently good.
Yeah, and it's that form of consistency that helps you really build a program. Speaking about that Syracuse game, Ohio did lose, but they didn't let Syracuse run away with it either. I believe there was only like a 10-point game when all was said and done, when all the smoke cleared. But they didn't let Syracuse just completely run away with the game. And I think a lot of that had to do with how potent the Ohio offense was with a leader like Parker Navarro at quarterback. I believe they put 28 up on the Orange. I could be wrong there, like
22.
28 22. Gotcha. Um, yeah, so they definitely didn't let them run away with that. Is there something like special about this Ohio offense in particular that surrounds Navarro? Because Navarro had multiple talents through the air and on the ground.
Yes, that's exactly what Parker Navarro is. It's his dual threat capabilities, which make Ohio a really dangerous offense. And Ohio usually has a good running back that is alongside them. I know Ohio's always emphasized quarterbacks with some degree of mobility. They had Nathan Rourke for a while, then they had his brother Curtis Rourke, who before an ACL tear had a lot more mobility back when he was at Ohio than he had at Indiana last year. Parker Navarro has probably been as good of a rusher as any of them, and we really saw that late last season. 4 of his last 5 games, he had 100 plus yards. There was that Central Michigan game where he almost had 180 in that game, and he can just take over as a mobile quarterback. And he's one of the best in college football at it, having 1,054 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns last year. Just, I think, which would probably be responsible for as many fantasy points, maybe of any running quarterback, maybe with the exception of Army's Bryson Daly. But yeah, Parker Navarro did so much on the ground. And a lot of times you give the dual threat quarterback label to somebody who's just a good rusher that happens to be a quarterback. But no, Navarro can actually throw the ball too. He had a 2,400 yards last year passing, and I thought his throwing capabilities were really on full display in that Cure Bowl against Jacksonville State, going up against the CUSA champions, getting over 250 yards through the air there on an efficient performance. And efficiency is the name of his game. He completed over 66% of his passes last year. I think his threat of the run game really helps unlock the passing game. So Ohio is going to be a team that wants to ground the ball, but I think that really opens up more for Parker Navarro in this offense. But he will have a new look receiving core this year with the loss of Coleman Owen, his roommate. So that's going to take a bit of a different look in the aerial game, but that ground game should still be super strong in 2025.
Yeah. Speaking of that ground game, I mean, what is a running back without his guys up front? And from what I could understand just by reading some of the posts that were on your website, is that um, they have a very experienced offensive line. They have a lot of returning production. Um, they have Davion Witherspoon,
Yes.
hopefully said, and Shedrick Rose, obviously, who came from Rutgers, and then graduate transfer Nick Marinaro. Marinaro. Um, they all like bring extra experience to an offensive line, and a lot of almost like power four can experience too, because you have Shedrick Rhodes coming back to the Bobcats after spending the year up at Rutgers. So, how do you think having all that experience is going to impact your running game?
Well, Ohio's offensive line is going to take a new form this year. They had a really good offensive line coach the past few years in Alan Rudolph, who followed Tim Albin to Charlotte. So it's kind of a reset from there. And the unit also loses. It was a 6-year senior, longtime leader, Parker Titsworth, who was basically the heart and soul of that Ohio team, an all-MAC center there. So that's going to be a big loss. But I think Davion Witherspoon is good continuity that is going to help keep this line sturdy. I think amidst some of the turnover that they've had, he was a 14-game starter last year for Ohio, and he'll man down the left tackle spot. But I do think that Ohio's run schemes have been really good. Brian Smith already has experience in that offense, and he can take some of the things that he's learned over the years from guys like Tim Albin and guys like Alan Rudolph. So I think that Brian Smith being around them is going to really help this run game. And they get back C.A. Bangura, who was a 1,000-yard rusher for Ohio before he entered the transfer portal. And he spent last year at Minnesota. Didn't get much production at Minnesota, but in 2022, he had over 1,000 yards. In 2023, he had over 800 yards. So Ohio knows exactly the type of running back it has to lead its offense. And last year, Ohio's run game ranked in the top 10 of the FBS. And if the offensive line can hold somewhat steady, Navarro and Bangura already are there just as tools, which can help replicate that effort.
Yeah. And with that experience, it's actually a great foil for Rutgers on the other hand, where we have, incoming transfers like Bradley Weaver. We have Doug Blue Eli on the inside. We have our new class of defensive ends coming in too. Plus, Jordan Walker, who's going to be a depth piece, who led the team in sacks and isn't even expected to start behind Eric O'Neill. And I think most people are overlooking the fact that this Ohio team can reveal a bunch of tests in the position battles because you have that experienced offensive line going up against a transfer reloaded defensive line that hasn't really worked together before. However, they do have talent and experience, as especially coming up from the lower levels. It's going to be interesting to see like how exactly those two units stack up against one another.
Yeah, I do think that Rutgers' defensive line might be one of the strengths of this team this year. I know we don't know what they look like as a cohesive unit just because we haven't seen them play together. But watching Eric O'Neill last year rush the passer, James Madison, he's one of the top guys just in the country. He had 13 sacks there. And then Doug Blue Eli, I think, is going to be a huge piece in the interior. It's his nose tackle. He just provides a lot of size there coming from TCU, South Florida. So I think that Rutgers' defensive line could be one of the strengths this year. And then we have Bradley Weaver, who ranked atop Ohio in sacks the last 2 years. So there are a lot of good pass rushers there. So I think that's one area that Rutgers could find an advantage in this game, especially with Ohio losing some of its key pieces like Christoph Atkinson and Parker Titsworth on the offensive line.
Arnav, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see Rutgers having an advantage there. I did for one of my articles, I saw the spread actually went up 4 points from 10.5 when it lined open, and the line opened at 10.5, then it went up to 14.5. And doing some more research, I did notice that a lot of the offensive, some people on the offensive line moved out, and some of the pieces who have been reserves have are going to be expected to step up. Some of the names I was reading where Joshua Waite is transferring from a D2 school, Shippensburg. I believe he's supposed to be one of the guards. And then in terms of their other players that from Ohio itself, Jordan Jones, the tackle, center Cam Wright, and guard Trent Allen are, I think, at the top of the depth chart from what I saw. And then, yeah, I guess bringing, I don't know. So I saw like between Rutgers bringing up their top, bringing in all these transfers, they might be new, but there's a lot of talent going against, I guess also, even though they have continuity, like going against like a fresh offensive line, basically. Like I feel like that could, like you said, like Rutgers could have the advantage there. And then on the other side of the ball, I mean, Ohio also replaces a few faces on their defensive line. Obviously, the big one being Bradley Weaver going to Rutgers, and they bring in a couple of transfers. Some of the names I was seeing was Anas Lookman, Evan Herman, who came from Vanderbilt, Pius Ajugo. So they also have a fresh front. Rutgers actually does have a lot of continuity on that offensive line, especially in the interior. So I mean, I feel like the trench advantage could favor Rutgers. And is that like kind of what you understand from why the line like went up from like 10.5 to like 14.5, which is just over 2 touchdowns?
To be honest, I'm surprised it's that large. I do feel like this game would probably be on the lower scoring end. I know Rutgers' defense was a bit on the shakier side last year. There was a magic number 24. If they allowed 24 points, they lost. If they didn't, things went better. But Ohio's defense is, I know Ohio has a lot of moving parts, but they did last year. Their defense has been one consistent force the past few years, ranking top 15 basically in a multitude of defensive categories, whether it's scoring defense, run defense, especially. Ohio has been a strength. They finished 4th in the country last year in that regard. I think they finished top 10 also in 2023. So I expect Ohio, with Coach Hauser, their defensive coordinator, back, I think that Ohio still should have a pretty good defense, and this is going to be on kind of the lower scoring, sloppier type of game that we'll see, where the defenses are the commanding units leading this charge. So I don't know if 14.5, that feels a little too high to me. I think Ohio is going to probably be a little closer than that in this opening matchup.
One place where you would think that Rutgers would have the advantage is in the passing game, with Ian Strong getting DT Sheffield from North Texas, KJ Duff continuing to develop, Ethan Kaliakmanis really having a strong end to last year. But then you have to look at Ohio and realize that they have a talented secondary too. Tank Pearson, DJ Walker, Rick A. Hyatt, all that talent really helps. Really is what almost propelled them. I mean, Tank Pearson was was going to be a draft pick, and sorry, if I could better word this. That's a draft prospect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I believe he had 5 interceptions for the Bobcats last year, if I'm remembering correctly. 5?
4.
4. Thank you. So it's a reality. There's no weakness to that Ohio defense. The thing is, how much can Ohio move through Rutgers defense? It's gonna be interesting to see, because so much it's almost like the reverse of one another, where there's so much change on the Rutgers defense, but there seems to be a lot of change on the Ohio offense.
Mm.
So it's going to be interesting to see how the change in continuity stacks up against one another.
Yes, I do think that Ohio secondary, as you just mentioned, might be their strongest overall position group, of course, outside the backfield, because Parker Navarro and C.A. Bangura should be a pretty good duo there. But yeah, the secondary, Tank Pearson, 4 picks last year, good shutdown corner. I mean, Ohio did lose one corner, Roman Parody, who's been tearing it up in preseason right now. But then you have DJ Walker, who was really young star last year as a redshirt freshman, just broke out. Had 53 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 7 pass deflections. And DJ Walker, one of the 4 captains of this team, he's somebody that's appearing on some of these preseason watch lists you see for best defensive player, best defensive back. So his name's getting up there. So I do think Ohio's secondary should be one of the strong suits of the team. And the matchup I'm looking forward to most is how DT Sheffield performs against that secondary, because DT Sheffield was a home run hitter last year at North Texas in that air raid offense. Him and Chandler Morris had an inseparable connection. DT Sheffield was just a consistent downfield threat. And I'm curious to see if Rutgers has the verticality with Ethan Kaliak-Manis in that passing offense to really keep Sheffield's numbers like they looked last year at North Texas, where he had 11 receiving touchdowns, one of the top in the country.
The one thing about Sheffield coming to Rutgers is that, he does have players like Strong and KJ Duff flanking him, and in even some packages, he's going to have somebody like Ben Black who can absolutely just fly down the sideline. Ran a 4.38 40 time. SBN Arnav, no, he needs to work on actually catching the ball a little bit, but it's going to be interesting to see how all of those players are accounted for when this is quoted by the Big Ten Network, easily the Rutgers' best wide receiver core since Shiano returned in his 2.0 era.
Mm-hmm. Since Tyquan Underwood and Kenny Britt.
Yeah.
Good times, good memories, right? all but memories at this point. That leads us to a little bit of interesting storylines that have to do with the Ohio game. The first one being that Bradley Weaver matches up against his old team. Weaver did have a press conference not too long ago where obviously, he communicated professionalism. He represented the program well. He didn't want to give the Bobcats any bulletin board material to put a target on his back. But I just thought it was interesting how, because you were talking about the changes on the offensive line too, how are they going to match up against one of their old talents in Weaver?
Yeah, they know his moves. I mean, actually, I can't say that because they only returned 1 starter on the offensive line, and that's Davion Witherspoon. But I mean, even some of the reserves that try and step up, guys like Jordan Jones, maybe Trent Allen, that might have bigger roles on the offensive line this year, would know some of Bradley Weaver's moves. But still, he's going to be difficult to stop. He was terrorizing MAC offensive lines the past 2 years there, getting 8.5 sacks last year, improving on his 2023 total. And Weaver, I mean, he gave his heart and soul to Ohio. He was one of the guys that entered the transfer portal after the 2023 campaign, and then he returned to Ohio to run it back, and I'm sure he's glad about that decision, winning that MAC championship at Ohio and earning all MAC status. So Bradley Weaver, he's going to be one of the top players on that Rutgers pass rush, which I'm really excited about that Rutgers pass rush this year, especially opposite of Eric O'Neill, as I mentioned earlier, where I think, I mean, you have 2 guys that were they're among their conference leaders in sacks, both ranking top 3 in their conference there. Rutgers needs that kind of pass rush this year to improve their defense. And I think that that's going to be one of the strong points of this Scarlet Knights team as they look to continue their winning ways of the past 2 years.
Well, that'll be a nice change of pace. I think our sack leader last year ended the season with a total of 4 sacks.
Yeah.
Did you have something you wanted to add, Arnav?
I mean, I guess the other interesting storyline from this game's Cedric Rhodes, which I guess we already talked about a little bit, but going from Ohio to Rutgers, like I was reading about his career at Ohio. He started, I believe, multiple seasons like at the right tackle, and then he went to Rutgers. He didn't really see a lot of playing time because Rutgers also had like a pretty solid offensive line that's continuing to develop continuity. So he's more of like a reserve. Ended up transferring back to Ohio, but then now in this first game comes back to Rutgers, I guess. I mean, I don't know if he's, projected to be on that starting 5 or not, but I mean, either way, like obviously having him back on the Bobcats and then returning to Scarlet Knights must be like definitely an interesting storyline around this game as well.
I think he'll start. I mean, he was a 2-year starter. I think his final 2 years at Ohio, 2 very successful seasons on the offensive line in 2022 and 2023. So I can assume that role has been waiting for him ever since he's returned. So that'll help Ohio because that is kind of like a returning starter. It's just like a player that missed a season due to injury in his back, except the best part is he didn't miss due to injury. So it's not like he's recovering anywhere. He's just coming back to Ohio, just like the running back C.A. Bangura. Both those guys went to the Big Ten in 2024, couldn't carve out as much playing time as they did back in Athens. And now they're right back to where they started their college career. So yeah, that's another storyline is you have Rhodes and Weaver who get to go against each other once again in this game. There's also Jet Elad, who was at Ohio from 2019.
I was reading. I didn't realize he started his career at Ohio
before UNLV. Yeah, he's like a 7th-year senior now. So he's at I think his 3rd FBS school. So yeah, there's some Ohio Rutgers connections. That's one new consequence of the transfer portal era is you have a lot more revenge games than you used to have.
Is there an Ohio Rutgers pipeline forming?
Perhaps. I mean, a lot of times that's by coaching staff. I don't know if Ohio's coaching staff has Rutgers ties, maybe back in the day, or if it goes vice versa. I mean, like a lot of Ohio guys transferred to Charlotte this offseason to follow Tim Albin, so the pipeline's established there. But I don't know if there's too many ties between Brian Smith's staff and Greg Schiano's staff this year.
I mean, you never know who Schiano knows. The guy's been in the business for how long. But touching a little bit more on Rhodes' story is that when he did transfer over to Rutgers, he was pretty much everyone assumed like this guy's going to be on the 2 deep. He's going to be the next man up if either Holland Pierce or Tyler Needham go down with injury. Then Needham misses the season with injury. Brian Felter also goes down, our guard. And players like Dante Chin and Taj White start getting subbed in instead. And Rhodes never really saw the field. Do you think that there could be a possible reason for that? Or was it just, he never packed on weight? Maybe he didn't develop right? I just kind of thought it was a little bit interesting about how we did have several injuries on the offensive line, and Rhodes still never really cracked the starting lineup.
I don't know the answer to that. I haven't talked to him about that situation yet or since he's got back at Ohio, so I'm not sure exactly what the situation is. I mean, different coaching staffs have different preferences. Sometimes they look for different characteristics or qualities in the offensive line, and I think maybe that's the reason he went back to Ohio, is a place that has more familiarity, a place where he knows he's been a starter and has thrived in these offenses in the past. And that's just comfortability for him. He tried to go out of his comfort zone for a year, go to Rutgers. It didn't work out. Now he's back home. And that's at least one thing on the transfer portal is you can always go back now these days.
One of the personal reasons why is that I believe that him and Taj White were kind of almost on like a similar playing level. It's just that Taj White had a lot more years of eligibility left, and they decided to put the younger guy in, let him develop, let him get some game time. Because if you have the 2 guys on very similar levels, you might want to give the nod to the younger guy. Let him get some experience, let him get some playing time. Maybe even bump him over to left tackle, depending on how this season goes over there, because that's a mess that we've been covering, where we don't know who the left tackle is going to be. But yeah, that was just kind of like spitball. I was just interested if you knew anything about that situation.
Mhm.
So, gonna go ahead and take another pivot over to our second team of the preview. Miami of Ohio lost to Ohio in the MAC championship. I'm sure there was no love lost in that game, even though Ohio handled business pretty easily going against their rival. I'm sure there was some exchange after the game. Last season, Miami of Ohio did match up against certain Power 4 teams, including Cincinnati, Notre Dame, Northwestern. They did lose all those games. Notre Dame, God, really handled business against them. But even like Northwestern and Cincinnati, they didn't pull away. They didn't completely handle the Redhawks in those games. Do you expect a similar result from this year? Because I do know that they are replacing everybody on offense, I believe, right? Or yeah,
All 11 starters, yes.
yeah, all 11 starters are getting replaced on offense. Do you expect Miami to be at the same level that they were last year, or do you think that they're possibly taking a step back?
It's tough to say. I would probably say offensively, you could see a step back, especially because the offensive line was such a commanding presence on that team. They had a very veteran offensive line last year, and you lose your starters led by Reed Holsky and all MAC selection there. Then I think that's going to be a really tough unit to rebuild because this game against Rutgers, as I alluded to their defensive line and all that before, it's going to have a lot of trench warfare in it. And that's going to be really important. So Miami really needs to restock wisely through that offensive line. And they didn't really get too many transfers that to bolster the unit. I mean, Austin Uge comes as a backup from Stanford. Other than that, it's pretty much just last year's incumbents next man up. But the fortunate part of Miami is more than any MAC school, they get big offensive linemen. There are tons of like 6'7", 6'8" guys that they've had for years on the offensive line. And it's usually one of the tallest and heaviest starting lines in the MAC. So Miami does a really good job of luring those guys in. There's 3 6'8" and 4 6'6" guys on the roster. I just checked. So a lot of big linemen that Miami brings to the table. And I think another thing that helps Miami is all the staff's on the same page. Chuck Martin, he started in 2014 there. I mean, you never hear about Chuck Martin and coaching rumors or anything. He is just stable to Miami, and he's brought Miami to MAC championship games the last 2 years. He's won 2 MAC championships at Miami. He just does a good, consistent job there. And both his offensive and defensive coordinators have both been there the entire time since 2014, which is insane continuity, insane stability for a staff. So I think that helps Miami reload better than other teams as they have that culture in place. There's not all these coaching changes or outside distractions. So I think that's one thing that's going to help them restock, but restocking that offensive line is going to be difficult. Now, quarterback, they get a former MAC MVP in DeQuan Finn. That's going to be huge. DeQuan Finn, he won the starting job at Baylor last year over Sawyer Robertson. Very good quarterback, Sawyer Robertson. But DeQuan Finn suffered an early season injury, and then Baylor's offense took off under Robertson, and they weren't going to sub Finn back in there. But Finn was a star at Toledo, led Toledo to a 2022 MAC championship win. 2023 led them back to the MAC championship game, won MAC MVP, first team all MAC, had Toledo in the rankings briefly. And he's just a very efficient and effective dual threat quarterback that Miami really needs to run this offense.
Yeah, I was hearing like great things about Finn. We have an opponent preview series that we've been working on since I guess probably about a month ago. We started with like Ohio, Miami, Ohio, and my first one was Miami, Ohio. Andrew did Ohio, and one of the things that caught my eye was like Finn's production level at Toledo. I mean, he obviously like we meant, I think he passed for like over 7,000 yards or something crazy, and he won multiple he won the MAC championship with them, and he just had a true dual threat quarterback. So I mean, coming back now to Miami, Ohio, I think that that could provide like a huge infusion of offense over there. I mean, I guess assuming now the rest of the offense, like the offensive line, like holds up everything. I think skill players are, if I remember, they got a couple of power forward transfers at the receiver position, although they're not like, I don't believe they were the most experienced, but they are coming in from the power four at receiver. I'm also seeing inexperienced tight ends on our outline. So I guess like, what does the skill positions look like? We talked about the offensive line, quarterback. What do the skill positions look like for the Red Hawks this season?
Yeah, there's some transformations on the skill positions for Miami. And just to start as a baseline, even though Miami lost a lot offensively and lose all 11 starters, it wasn't really the strongest unit last year. They ranked 96th in scoring at 24.1 points per game. There were 3 games that Miami went without a single touchdown against Northwestern, against Notre Dame, and against Ohio in that MAC championship game. Now, they started the season as a huge struggle on offense, but as Miami usually does, they figure things out in MAC play. They usually schedule brutal non-conference slates, but they figure things out in MAC play to help the season as it progressed. This year, it's just going to be new players, new talent. DeQuan Finn brings a sense of mobility that Brett Gabbert didn't. Brett Gabbert was solid mobile quarterback, but DeQuan Finn just unlocks a new level of that Miami didn't have the last 6 years. Brett Gabbert was the starter there. So that's one thing where the offense could take on a different form. But I do feel comfortable in the Red Hawks running back depth, as Jordan Brunson and Kenny Tracy have both been with the team for a long time. They're both accomplished. Jordan Brunson's going to be your bruiser back. He's going to be probably your lead workhorse. And then there's Kenny Tracy, who's really a receiver playing running back. He's played a focal point in the receiving game the past few years. You add Kenny Tracy to a new look receiving core that gets guys like Deion Colsey, Darian Williamson, Keith Reynolds from schools like Notre Dame, Florida State, and Washington. It's a new look receiving core, and Miami has really succeeded with wide receiver transfers over the past few years. You look at Gage Larvadin, who comes in 2023, immediately becomes a number 1 guy there before transferring to South Carolina. You look at Mac Hippenhammer. He came from Penn State, didn't really play too much at Penn State, comes to Miami, unlocks his role as the number 1 guy there. And you look at Cade McDonald, who came from Michigan State, was a walk-on there, didn't have too much experience at Michigan State, arrives at Miami. Now he's getting good reps with the Browns in preseason, maybe a candidate to make the roster or at least a practice squad there. So I think that Miami has had so much success with transfer receivers recently that even if these guys haven't had too much production, this is their opportunity. This is where that hidden talent that might have been buried in the depth charts could finally emerge. And Miami's receiving core at the end of last year was incredible with Reggie Virgil, Javon Tracy. They both transferred elsewhere. And then Cade McDonald, who I mentioned, is in the NFL right now.
Yeah, I mean that definitely does sound pretty solid. I guess I did have some question marks, not really knowing I guess how these guys without the experience, but I mean I think you definitely answered that question that these guys are going to be pretty productive, and Miami can be a school that unlocks that potential, as you'll often see around the MAC. But on defense, a little bit of overhaul as well. Departure of Matt Salopek and Ty Wise, and a loss of 3 starters on the defensive line. But I believe Miami was also a pretty strong team on defense last season as well, so which helped them win a lot of games. So I mean, what does what does the defense look like for the Red Hawks in 2025?
Yeah, it was excellent defense in 2024. Never allowed 40 points. That 38 was the only time, the 38 in the MAC championship they allowed to Ohio was the only time they allowed more than 30 last year. Held half their opponents to 17 points or fewer. So Miami has built a brand off of really potent defenses the past few years. But as you mentioned, some of these longtime guys like Matt Salopek, a former MAC Defensive Player of the Year, Ty Wise, who is a great backfield invader from the inside linebacker spot, and some of the key members of their pass rush like Brian Ugwu and Corey Settle are gone. So it's going to be a very, I'd say, somewhat of a different look on defense. They're not as transforming as much as the offense. I'll say the foundation of the defense this year is the safety room. Silas Walters wasn't all MAC last year, but he definitely had a case too. Eli Blakey was. So you have basically an all MAC caliber safety room, maybe the best tandem the conference has to offer. So I do think that Miami is really good. Those guys can create stops at the line of scrimmage in the run game, and they're decent in coverage on the back end. So that should really help. And they also have some good outside linebacker talent, and their outside linebackers are really good in coverage. Corbin Hondrew, he has multiple interceptions the past few years. And there's Oscar McWood, who's kind of played a hybrid of an outside linebacker nickel role, brother of Ryan McWood, a former Miami, Ohio great. So I think that the outside linebacker position has a good starting point, but it's the other positions that I have some questions about. The pass rush. Miami was pretty good at invading the backfield, both against the run game and against the pass last year. So that's one area that I have some question marks about. I don't know if they can be as strong this year without the Salapexes and Wise and Ugus of the defense, but they did bring in some new talent there. And Cam Wilson is the name I'm looking at, a defensive end who had a good experience at Louisville and Cincinnati, who could maybe emerge into a top pass rusher. And then there's just Adam Trick, who was a defensive end last year, who was one of the top reserves on this defense. So maybe they can rebuild that pass rush with them, and that'll be an interesting matchup against the Rutgers offensive line as they get one of those early September tests. But yeah, there's a good mix of guys that have experience and guys that are newcomers or just more raw reserves on this defense.
Yeah, certainly. And Adam Trick was another player like I spotlighted in the preview. I was seeing like on different sites a lot of good things about him. He had 37 tackles, 4.5 sacks last year. Another big face that's coming in on the defensive side by Job from Kansas. I think he's also projected to have like a big impact on Miami, Ohio, for the Miami, Ohio defense. So I mean, those are like a couple of the big names that I was reading on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, do you have like anything you want to say about like Job and the impact that Trick and Job can make on the defense this season?
Yeah, Job is a little less experienced than the other defensive end that they brought in, Cam Wilson, that I was mentioning from Louisville, Cincinnati. He could have an immediate impact, especially because Miami does like to rotate some of their defensive ends. Like as you saw, Adam Trick was a reserve last year, and you just rattled off his production. He got a lot of minutes, so I do think that Job will be a new player that can really help expand and exhibit the depth of this Miami pass rush. They do have Nasir Washington, at least in the middle at defensive tackle, as one of their few returning starters, which should help. I think 3 returning starters in this unit, and Washington's one of them. So having a defensive tackle that provides at least some stability on the defensive line with all these moving parts. But I said Miami has had a lot of good defenses recently under Chuck Martin. They're not a team that posts 40 points on opponents. They're not a team that wins games in high scoring shootouts. Miami basically suffocates opponents and wins some really ugly games. So that's kind of their style. The Redhawks always kind of they revel in obscurity rather than the spotlight. A lot of times Toledo is picked to win the MAC, or people get excited about Western Michigan's offense or what Ohio can do. But Miami is just always there, just lurking. And I think that they're just underrated just because of how ugly they have been able to win so many of their games the past few years. It's kind of like a brand for them. So defense is always first when it comes to the Miami Redhawks, and I think that should be the case again this year. But having a guy like DeQuan Finn at quarterback certainly helps make that offensive rebuild a bit easier after losing all 11 starters.
Yeah, certainly. I agree with that because even like their Power 4 games, I mean, like they didn't really let the score get too out of hand. Even Notre Dame was 20-3, but I mean Northwestern, I saw
3-0 in the second quarter, like in the mid-second quarter on Notre Dame, they were up 3-0 in that game. Notre Dame, that 28-3 didn't feel like a 28-3 game.
Yeah, and then like Cincinnati 27-16. Northwestern, I was like watching the highlights. I mean, they came very close to. I mean, they were basically in that game, but we're talking about ugly games. Like that was a ugly win for Northwestern. I mean, again, Power 4 school against a group of 5. Like they were able to pull that one out, even though Northwestern didn't have the best season. But that kind of like represents the kind of football that Miami, Ohio, like also tends to play in those types of games. They've been getting a lot of wins in MAC play. I could definitely see that happening. But like you said, like with DeQuan Finn coming in and these receivers, like hopefully that does open up the offense for them as well.
Yeah, it's like a Big Ten West in the MAC style.
Kinda, yeah. Like the Big Ten plays a lot of teams in the Big Ten play similar, especially the West. Yeah, play similar
It's
styles of
complementary football,
Like,
defense and field position, and just
special
playing
teams.
smart on offense.
Rutgers and Iowa know like that kind of stuff very well too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Do we dare call it Iowa ball?
It is to some extent. I mean, Miami, as they had a really good receiving core last year. They had a 6-year starter at quarterback without transferring, and Brett Gabbert. So there were pieces there, but I mean, the offense, it wasn't accurate a lot of times. Like they would just have so many drives that would just be one short run, 2 incompletions, and then they're punting. So, I mean, the offense wasn't completely terrible, but it wasn't great. But the defense is really what drove the team to the MAC championship in 2023 and then back to the MAC title game in 2024 before the loss to Ohio.
Gotcha. So do we kind of like wrapping up with both teams here? Do you have like kind of like a projections of where these teams are going to stand in the MAC? Like when all things is said and done, do you think they're going to return to the top of the mountain? Like you said, Miami's always lurking in the shadows. Right. In the funniest way possible. But yeah, is there any like prediction of where you see these teams at the end of this season?
So they were picked 2nd and 3rd in the MAC coach's preseason poll. I think Ohio was 2nd and Miami was 3rd. So these teams are gaining the respect from the coaches after the runs that they had recently. So Miami's been to the MAC championship game 2 straight years. They've had 20 wins the last 2 years. Meanwhile, Ohio's in the midst of their best stretch in history, 3 straight double-digit win seasons, 3 straight bowl wins. Finally got that first MAC championship since 1968 last year. So they're finally getting the respect of that, even though they do have a lot of lost pieces from last year's MAC championship game. I would expect both teams to still be in the upper echelon in the MAC. There are a lot of bad teams in the MAC. Kent State, Akron, UMass. There are a lot of free wins that these teams should be able to get. And I mean, I would like to see Kent States and Akrons and UMass as the world turn around, but I'm just basing it off recent history. These programs are getting 0 to 3 wins every single season. And a lot of times the Miamis and Ohios are able to beat up on these teams and get some easier wins. But in terms of the MAC hierarchy, I have gone on the record saying I believe Buffalo and Toledo is a MAC championship game. So I don't have these teams crashing Detroit this year. And also the last team to repeat in the MAC was 2011 to 2012 Northern Illinois. So not great news for the Ohio Bobcats this year, as this is a conference with parity that sees a new winner every year. But I still think Ohio and Miami are bowl teams. They could be in the maybe anywhere from the 6-6 to 8-4 range regular season. And Miami is well known for scheduling tough. Ohio has some tough games too. Ohio has to play at Ohio State this year. Miami has a few tough games opening up against Wisconsin and Rutgers, which could be in Big Ten territory before having a challenging home game against UNLV, who's one of the favorites in the Mountain West. So these teams schedule tough, not too many easy wins early on the docket for them in non-conference play. Once MAC play comes and then they start facing some easier competition, I think that they'll definitely make bowl games and continue their winning ways under Brian Smith, first-year coach at Ohio, and then Chuck Martin, who's 12th-year coach at Miami.
That continuity thing that you mentioned with the MAC championship, that kind of stuck out to me because, you know, as you said, like teams are always kind of rotating. The last time that a team won back-to-back was Northern Illinois back in 2012, you said?
Yes.
Yeah, that kind of stuck out to me because especially on the Big Ten side of things, at least before the other 4 joined the conference, it was kind of like the three kings, and then the peasants in the field around them.
Yeah, right. Big Ten West went 0-10 in Big Ten championship games. Wisconsin had some good teams, and Wisconsin never even won one of them.
Right. Yeah.
I kind of thought like that continuity thing was interesting. It talks to the level of almost like even competition that really is what makes the MAC so interesting to follow, because you never know what team is going to come out of nowhere, right?
Mm-hmm. And Ohio was that team last year. Ohio, I know they were coming off back-to-back double-digit seasons, but every once in a while you'll see a team that just loses so much production that says, "Ooh, it's going to be a down year for them." I mean, a lot of people right now aren't picking Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game because they didn't bring in too many transfers. It's basically last year's backups are going to be this year's starters. So a lot of people are picking the Penn States, maybe Oregon's over them. And last year, Ohio lost production like Ohio State, except they're not recruiting a bunch of 5 stars to come in. So it's a little tougher. They're relying on a more veteran talent. So Ohio lost a lot of that production. They were the surprise team that snuck up on everybody and ended up winning this thing. So who knows what team it's going to be this year? I mean, Buffalo and Toledo are personally the favorites I have winning in the MAC championship game. And that's basically based on the retention that they've had and the returning talent that's back in both of those programs. But I mean, these Ohio and Miami teams that are replacing a lot, perhaps they have a run like the 2024 Bobcats did.
It's definitely possible that they do it. I mean, reading based on like my knowledge of it too, like I seen Buffalo and Toledo usually at the top. I mean, Toledo had the big ups, I guess, you can call it upset over like Mississippi State. That was a 24-point victory, and they were among the top of the conference. And I feel like both of those two have usually kind of been to, and Buffalo is supposed to be pretty good, especially with their continuity. But I could definitely see Miami, Ohio, I mean, being at the very least in the hunt. Like maybe they make a run to the championship game as well. But I mean, I guess another question I wanted to ask was, I mean, both of these teams start the season Power 4 heavy, different degrees of Power 4 too. I mean, Ohio takes on Rutgers, a road game. We talked about the line being 14.5. West Virginia is a home game for Ohio. I mean, that's going to be huge. I mean, with Ohio State, even another level like above these schools, like as Rutgers fans would know. I mean, what's like kind of the mindset with Ohio and like maybe picking one of these teams off? Is that really something that Ohio fans see as a possibility of maybe getting the Rutgers game or the West Virginia game? And kind of similar with Miami, Ohio, is there like a fighter's chance for them to potentially steal one? Is that kind of like the outlook on it, or is it more like a game like a week to week? We'll see what happens. I know that's a big Rutgers philosophy too. Like week to week we see play every season, so every week's a 1-0 game season. But I guess I mean do you is there like kind of an upset-minded mentality, especially for the first couple of weeks with Ohio State probably being like another level of tough, I guess, with Ohio and stuff like that?
I mean, Ohio State's probably the only game on Ohio fans' schedule where Ohio doesn't expect to win. I mean, this is a team that's had 3 straight double-digit seasons. It's not like they're some scrappy underdog that's ranking in the 110s every year that's just hoping to be relevant. Ohio's lived in the limelight. I mean, they hosted Iowa State a couple years ago and just beat Iowa State, and I think fans were expecting that win. And that was in 2023, and that Iowa State team was a bowl-bound Big 12 team that had some quality wins throughout that season. I think Ohio fans expect to at least be competitive and beat either Rutgers or West Virginia. I think they'd be very disappointed if they started 0-3. I think they expect to start at least 1-2 and figure out how to get a win in one of those games, either at Rutgers to open the season or against West Virginia in front of their home fans at Peton Stadium. I didn't say I'm predicting them to win the games. I'm saying that should be what Ohio fans' mentality and mindset is, because the program's had so much success the past few years, and Rutgers and West Virginia don't have numbers besides their name. They're quality teams. 7-6 and 6-7 last year. They're not preseason ranked. Like, they're not just completely out of the picture. These are manageable games for Ohio. So I do think that, and especially with a starting quarterback in Parker Navarro, who has exhibited as much talent as he had as a dual threat quarterback last year, Ohio should feel comfortable going into these games with the chances to win. So I think Ohio State's really the only game on the schedule where it's like, yeah, we'll just give our best and see what happens.
Yeah, I mean, even like a lot of teams in the Big Ten go into that one with like a similar, or maybe the fans do. The teams obviously, are going to go in with that winning mentality. But yeah, Ohio State definitely the toughest on the schedule. I could definitely see that with like Ohio. I mean, with Rutgers, being an opener, I mean, 10.5 point dogs, like I thought that line seemed apt. I mean, the 14.5, maybe a little higher. And we talked about the reasons, but I could definitely see Ohio like having like a puncher's chance. If they stay in the game, like things could happen towards the end where it can can go either way. And then West Virginia, a home environment, like I think that can maybe be the game where Ohio could get over the edge. I mean, a similar 6-7 team. I mean, maybe the home environment does something. I guess what about is the mentality similar with Miami, Ohio? Obviously a Big Ten heavy start. They get Wisconsin on the road, then Rutgers.
I feel like it's slightly different at Miami, Ohio. It's definitely improved, but Miami had I don't know the exact number. They had a crazy losing streak. I think that lasted from 2011 until the 2021 Frisco Football Classic, which was the bowl game that they added because there were too many bowl eligible teams. They hadn't beat a non-conference FBS opponent in that 10-year span. But they've won a few non-conference games recently. They beat Cincinnati in 2023. They beat Northwestern in 2022. So they've improved on that front recently. So I do think Miami does have maybe a little greater expectations. But, I mean, when Miami won the MAC in 2019, they beat their FCS team. They scheduled Iowa, Cincinnati, and Ohio State, 3 teams that all finished the season ranked, and they did not come close in those games. So I think that Miami, their fans know that they schedule tough. And last year, they made the MAC championship game despite starting 0-3 with losses to Northwestern, Cincinnati, and Notre Dame. So I think with Miami, they're kind of used to these struggling starts, starting the season 1-4, 1-3, and then recovering from that. So I think that's kind of, I mean, they want to improve upon it. I mean, for Miami, I think while they'll be underdogs probably to Wisconsin, Rutgers, and possibly UNLV, I do think that Miami has a chance to win all 3 of those games. Wisconsin just had its worst team since 2001 last year, 2002, going 5-7, and they're having their worst era in 2 decades. I mean, Rutgers has been a team that's MAC teams have been able to beat over the years. I think back to Eastern Michigan did it in the late 2010s, I think. So
Buffalo blew us
Yeah,
out.
yeah,
Buffalo.
Buffalo. I was
Yeah.
going to say Tyree
We were
Jackson
talking
of
about
Buffalo in the late 2010s also did it. So, I mean, these are games that I think Miami fans think that they have a chance, but don't necessarily expect to win.
I see. I mean, I think for both programs, that seems to be like a pretty apt attitude. Like, you have a chance. You're not really expecting to win. For Rutgers, non-conference mentality's kind of flipped a little bit with the Shiano thing. I mean, being in the conference is tough. The Big Ten, Rutgers has often relied on that 3-0 start, which has included a lot of Power 4 wins against ACC. They went down to Blacksburg and beat Virginia Tech. They beat Boston College. So this year, I guess, especially without a Power 4, I mean, even without a Power 4, I mean, even playing the top teams on the MAC, I guess Rutgers does expect to win those games. I mean, I would expect them to be at least relatively competitive for a while. But I mean, I think that's pretty much all we had to talk about, unless you had anything else that you wanted to mention, Andrew.
I really just wanted to highlight that, especially for the first 2 games, through a Rutgers fans lens, that there are position battles that we're really going to have to take a look at. We're going to have to take a look at the left tackle position with, Tyler Needham, Dante Chin, Taj White even possibly getting moved over from the right side. That's going to be something that's going to have to be under a little bit of a telescope, I want to say, a little bit of a microscope. I know the word. I know science. Put that one under a microscope. That's the one that, because even Shiano admitted during his press conferences that we're going to be using the first 3 games, just kind of like the same way they use the ACC games as like benchmark evaluation, and then launch into the Big Ten play. In all honesty, he really didn't talk about it. Granted, this is probably a head coach being a media professional too, and having good graces with the media, but he really didn't talk about it as if he talked about it like we were playing another ACC school, something on that level, about how they're going to use the first 3 weeks to figure out how their team matches up against Big Ten play. It doesn't sound like to me that he thought that they were even much of a step down from, or even a step down at all from, the previous out-of-conference opponents that Rutgers has scheduled.
They're not. I mean, history suggests they're not. At least they weren't last year. I mean, Miami did have that loss to Northwestern early in the season, which was just, I feel like that was a game of just week one jitters and stuff. But Miami at the end of the season probably wins that game pretty easily. And then, yeah, I think that these are quality opponents. I mean, if you're ranking 1 through 136, I think I had Ohio in the 40s last year, probably Miami maybe in the 60s or 70s. So yeah, a lot of these teams are kind of on par to some of those mediocre, middle of the pack to lower ACC teams that you're facing. So I don't think that there's much of a drop off at all. I think, and just in college football in general, we have to stop thinking teams associating them just with their conference and have to think of what the team is itself.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And plus, on top of that, like with not scheduling somebody like that, you need to find other ways to get the exact same sort of evaluation, which Shiano so values. So he was able to go out and get the teams that he knew was, or Rutgers was able to go out and get the teams that they knew they weren't just going to walk all over. They weren't just, they weren't scheduling somebody from the bottom tier of the Sun Belt, which they were expecting to just completely walk over. They went out and were able to find some quality opponents. And I'm not 100% sure about how they exactly schedule MAC teams. I know that there has to be some sort of like monetary agreement involved or something like that. But the point is that they wanted to go get a higher quality of team, even though it wasn't a Power 5, and they did exactly that. So they have something to evaluate with.
Yeah, and that'll be a good test for their offense too, because these are two teams that historically have fielded some really good defenses over the year. So that'll present a good challenge for the offense in the early weeks for the Scarlet Knights.
And they actually have shown that they want to schedule games with the MAC too, because they scheduled Central Michigan for, I believe, 2029 as well. So that's going to kind of continue to schedule these MAC teams. It was something that Brian Fonseca mentioned in his press conference, with Shiano. There was another team mixed in there somewhere. I want to say one of the Michigans. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but they continue to go back to these MAC opponents as well.
Yeah, and UMass too, like who's now a member of the MAC. We open with them next season, so that's a lot of MAC on the schedule, and then the 4-game set against Temple, which will start in 2030. But I do agree, like Ohio and Miami, Ohio both, like I think a step up from what we've even relative to teams like Temple and Akron, like what Rutgers has scheduled in the group of 5 at least, and maybe a slight step down from some of the Power 4s, but not really too much of a drop off from those ACC games that are also kind of like middle of the tier that Rutgers has been able to pull off and win. And in terms of testing, the offense, testing the team as a whole, I mean, I think those 2 first games are going to be not a walk in the park, but also get Rutgers ready for Big Ten season. And then especially, considering Rutgers plays their FCS opponent, Norfolk State, week 3, maybe that's a game where, they could take it, obviously like no disrespecting anyone, but, maybe that's a game where you pull out the starters and they can rest up. But, having those 2 out of the way before a team like Iowa comes in and opens Big Ten play, that's going to be a huge game for Rutgers that I really hope they win. I'm not confident on that entirely, especially considering Iowa's improved the offense. But I mean, if Rutgers can really take advantage of these MAC games and really get themselves on the right foot, I mean, it could lead to some wins in the Big Ten play, because they're going to need that. Rutgers finishes off the season with like Ohio State, Penn State, Illinois. So they're going to need those middle tier Big Ten wins as well. So, I mean, as long as these games, hopefully they obviously work out for Rutgers, but they also do enough to prepare the Scarlet Knights, for the grueling road ahead.
I think that pretty much does it for everything that we got here today. Did you guys have something you wanted to mention really quick?
Oh, I mean, I think that's pretty much it. Like, did you have any? I didn't want to ask if you had any more questions about Rutgers or what to expect from the Scarlet Knights. Given that they're playing 2 of the teams in the MAC. So if you wanted to ask anything, you can before we wrap it up here.
What's your confidence level on 2-0?
I hope, Like confident, I mean, I don't know. I would say pretty confident. I wouldn't say guaranteed because things can happen, and these again are the two top teams in the MAC. I would not sleep on them or disrespect them. Not only because I don't want to do that in general, but because I see a potential where, like, if something goes wrong for Rutgers, if Ohio's in that game, if Ohio's in that game for a while, I mean, it could end up playing out like how Northwestern played out last year. So, I mean, there's definitely a chance that one could slip away. That being said, Rutgers has significantly improved. They bring in all these transfers on defense. They bring guys like Sheffield and Campbell, the passing offense. Like, Rutgers is also no longer the slouch that they used to be, where they would drop these games or be at a significant risk of dropping them. And then all the transfer portal stuff. I mean, I feel like if this was last year's Ohio team or Ohio team, like, I'd be a little bit more worried. I feel like this year's these teams are a little bit different, which gives me a little bit more confidence. Like, I thought the 10.5 was right. If this was last year's team, had me a little bit worried. I think kind of reading up, I feel a little bit more confident now that Rutgers should be able to win that one and not really have to sweat it. But I would not expect like a blowout in either of these games, like, by any means. And I think Rutgers has to be careful because last year Howard started the game down 14-7 and 17-7 at the half. I mean, if they do that again, I mean, it could be, an uphill battle. Rutgers could have to really, exert to win those games. So, I mean, they have to get off to a fast start. If they could do that and execute at their level, I think they should be 2-0.
For me personally, I think it's kind of something with Rutgers fans where calling us confident is not something that we're always so useful. I mean, I still have the 78 to loss Michigan in the back of my mind. So calling us confident is a little bit not quite there, but with especially facing two quality MAC opponents, and what Arnav said earlier, they started off slow against Buffalo. With a Buffalo team that was not as good as these two were last year because these two went to the MAC championship. The thing is, if Rutgers keeps it a game and they let them hang around, or they just find a way to hang around to the fourth quarter, who knows what happens. So I think that Rutgers, with how deep they have become on the offensive line, all the pickups that they had on the defensive line, they might be able to wear down the depth on both rosters, but I don't think that they're gonna have as much flash as some of these bigger schools like to do against group of five opponents. And I don't think that Rutgers is gonna get away with a lot of stuff that they would against a weaker MAC team. But I think if I had to put it almost on a scale of out of 10, I'd go a confidence level of 7 for 2-0. Just because of how much better the Scarlet Knights have gotten in the off season, picking some better group of five talents, mixing in with a lot of our younger guys, especially our receivers, getting one more year of development.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I mean, I'm sure Rutgers wishes they had that Kansas State game last year. That felt like that could have been a really good springboard into the season.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely an improved team, and I do think that they can feel some comfortability with what Shiano's brought the program the last 2 seasons.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, Arnav, I didn't mean to
No,
cut you off.
I was just saying the same thing. I mean, like I said, yeah, pretty confident. I would say maybe 7 to an 8. I definitely can't sleep on either of these teams. Rutgers has made a good habit of going 3-0 in the non-conference. So I would be pretty hopeful that continues. But like I said, I mean, I think we're getting 2 of the best teams in the MAC, and those should be good tests for Big Ten play. So I'm excited to see what we learn about Rutgers and these teams in this process, because I feel like that could definitely help them when the schedule gets tougher later in the year.
All right, and I think that pretty much does it for everything that we have here today. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on with us, previewing these first 2 games of our season. And as always, thank you everybody for listening. and remember that the bells must ring.